Hello everyone. Ever wonder how to conduct API testing in an effective and efficient manner using Mocha and Chai for Node.js applications? If so, keep watching this video to find out. First, first of all, so this video is going to be about testing uh, using Mocha and Chai, API testing specifically, and we're going to be using a Node.js application for this tutorial. Here is the GitHub URL for the Node.js application. I'll include this link in the video description so you can easily access it. So what I recommend is start by cloning this project into your local system and then opening it up in a coding editor such as VS Code. Also note that so this is the application that we'll be using for this tutorial. If you want to follow along with a different Node.js app, feel free to do so. There's no obligation to follow along with this application. So before diving into this application, let's have an overview of this application. So this is a Node.js application with a library management system theme, meaning it's supposed to represent a library management system. So the Node.js server application that we're testing in this tutorial is contained in the server folder, and our tests are contained in the test folder. For the sake of simplicity, we won't be connecting the app to an external database. Instead, we'll be using Cedar files and text files to cover our database functionality. As you see here are our two Cedar files that we're using, and here is a text file that we'll be using to represent our database. There are three main APIs that will be subjected to testing in this application. So they are the user API, as you see in this user routes folder, in this user routes file. The user routes are user API is responsible for handling all requests related to users, authentication, and registration. Next, we have the books API, responsible for handling all requests related to creating books, borrowing books, listing borrowed books, and listing all books. Next, we have the category API, which handles all requests related to listing categories of books. So the main testing technologies used for this tutorial will be the Mocha JavaScript testing framework, as shown here, and the Chai BDD and TDD JavaScript assertion library. So we're going to be using these two tools. We won't be going over the routes and middleware of the server of the business logic for this application for the sake of simplicity and brevity. But rather we'll go over the tests written for the application's routes and middleware. And if you're interested in how the application handles requests and uses its middleware, you could do that on your own time by accessing this repository and going through those files. So without further ado, let's get into the testing section. So first, we're going to start out with the home page test. So what we're doing here is we're checking for, so first of all, we're sending a GET request, and we're checking whether we're receiving a 200 error success code after making a request to this home page, which is a GET request. So this one is pretty simple. We're just checking for a 200 error code. Next, we can move on to the users API. Here's when a bit more complexity is involved. So starting with the first test, we can see that we're hitting a different route. So It's the API v1 user sign up route, and we're sending a post request to this URL. We're sending the valid register details object as the request body for this request. So let me open this up and show you what is contained in this file. So valid user details, valid register details is just a file that contains some sample data. It contains the full name, username, password, and email, and confirm password. These details are needed so that we can register this user. So we're passing in that object. The type form call will set the application xww form URL encoded request header for this request. So that's what that does. The validation of the request takes place in the end call, so in here. And where we assert that the response code should equal 202, 201. Finally, the done call is it ensures that Mocha will wait for the current test to finish before moving on to the next test. This done call is important in coordinating the test execution order in the asynchronous environment that we're running tests in. The next test is also in the same file, and it is this test. So it should throw an error if the username is less than 5 characters. This test sends a request to the same URL as the previous one. The only difference is that between this test and the previous one, the request body contains a purposeful error. The username value is intentionally left at less than 5 characters. So let me show you here. As you see, our username has only 4 characters. This is done so that an error response can be invoked by calling the API. Once the request is sent, we expect a 400 status error code. This assertion is done via the res status should equal 400 assertion statement. Finally, we also assert that the response body error field should contain the username length validation error that we're expecting, which is right here. So we're asserting that we should receive this message. So that is pretty straightforward, as you can see. Next, we are moving on to the show should throw error if username is empty test case. So basically, we're hitting the same route. It's very similar to the previously added test, with the only notable difference being that we're testing whether a validation error is returned in response to excluding the full name field from the request body. So let me show you the no full name request body. As you see, the full name field is not present, and that's done on purpose in order to elicit or invoke the required error response. The assertion for the presence of the new full name validation error is done via the statement res body error should equal your full name is required, and then we call done. And since it's an error code, we have a 400 error. Next, we can move on to the fourth test. So this fourth test should show should register a new user when provided request body is valid. So this test is unlike the previous test we've added because we're testing the happy path scenario for the post API v1 user sign up route, which is successful user registration. As the sign up request body contains valid data, we use the expect method to assert that the email, username, and full name fields of the response object is valid. So basically, we're sending the sign up object, which is right here, which contains these values. Then in the response body, we're expecting those exact same values in return. So nothing changed, it's just that once the user is registered, the server sends back the response body of the registered user. And that's what we're validating with expect calls. Next, we can move on to the should check for existing username test. So this test is checking whether the route can detect duplicate usernames. The detected response we're looking for is an error message indicating the user of duplicated usernames, as you see here. As you see in the send call, we only need to pass an object with a single username field containing the duplicated username. On top of asserting the username already exists message, we also assert that the response code of 409 has been received. So as you can tell, the username Rufus, it has already been registered as a user in the application. So passing it a second Rufus would throw this username already exists error. Now that we're done with the test for the users API, we can now cover the tests for the book API. These tests are contained in the book route folder or the test or file. And here it is, book route test.txt test.js. So let's go to the first test. So if the user is logged in, then the get request of books route should return a list of 3 books. Actually, not this one. We'll be covering this one. So if the user sends a get request to this route, it should return a list of books held by the user denoted by the user ID, which is a request parameter over here. So what we're doing here is that we're sending a user ID of 3, and we're expecting a list of books which should equal 3. So based on how we've structured our application, we have a list of books called rented books, and in this rented books array you can see that the user ID of 3 has been assigned to 3 different books, book ID 1, 2, and 3. Therefore, there's been 3 books that are rented out by user ID number 3. So that's why we're asserting that the length of the books array should be 3, as you see here. And then we call done to finish. And then since this is not a error negative test, we assert that it should end successfully. Now on to the second test. So the second test is should allow the user to create a new book and return it if the user is logged in via the post books route. So basically here, this test sends a post request to the API v1 books route. This route is supposed to create a new book based on the data provided in the request body and return that book object in the response body. Therefore, all our assertions check for the existence of the fields in the response body object, as you see here. If you're wondering why there is an array with 2 objects in the send method for this test, it's because that both the new book details and the logged in user's details contained in admin user and the new book details in add book are required by the API in order to create this new book. Therefore, the most convenient way to send both objects was to add them into an array and send the entire array as the request body. I will admit that this is not the cleanest and most modular and most maintainable way of sending the request body, but for the purposes of this small example application, we can make an exception. One final note of the expect method. So this expect method, we're not using just expect. This is not from the jest library. This is from the Chai testing library. And we are using Chai testing library because we have defined expect to come from Chai expect and not just expect. And the reason we're using Chai's expect over the one provided by Jest is because it makes it much easier to check for the existence of a value via its chainable getters, i.e. to not be null. So it has this very nice feature of having chainable getters. For example, you can say to not be null to check for a field not being null, or you could say to be null. So when you expect that this field to be null, you can do so like that. So it's very handy to use the Chai expect method, and that's why we're doing so in this instance. More on the Chai chainable getters and their official documentation, which I'll link to in the description, in the video description. Now let's move on to the third test in the book route test file. So this is the should allow the user to borrow a book if the user is logged in via this post request. So this test is largely similar to the previously covered test. The main purpose of this route is to let the logged in user borrow a book. The borrowed book will be returned in the response body. The request body will contain an array of the same format as the previous test. So add book and the non-admin user are needed by the route's middleware. So non-admin user is different from admin user previously. So this is basically a user that is not admin. So false for is admin, whereas admin user has true for the is admin field. The response body for this last test should contain the rented book, which represents the book rented by the user. The Chai testing library's expect method is used to conduct the field existence check validation with the chainable getter to not be null. So we're getting that rented book object and we're validating the three fields in it. Lastly, let's quickly cover the category API. So this is not as in-depth as the previous two APIs, and basically what we're doing here is this test right here is saying that if the user is logged in, then calling the books route, so API v1 category route, calling the API v1 category route should return back all the categories of books that are present in the current library management system. So all we're checking here is that the length of the rest body categories object is greater than 5. So in our book seeder file, we have a list of book categories. And we have categories that consist of a list of 8 objects. So these categories are fed into the application. And when we call this route, what's being returned are those categories. As we don't know the exact amount of categories, and we only know how much it should be greater than, i.e. 5, that's exactly what we're asserting here. So we're saying that we know that the categories are greater than 5. We don't know the exact number. So let's assert that the categories.length property should be greater than 5, which it does. then we call done in order to finish the test. So that's it. If you made it this far, congrats. You now have some idea, hopefully good idea of how to test or write effective API tests for Node.js applications using Mocha and Chai testing frameworks and libraries. As you can tell, they're very potent, and we have not even begun to scratch the surface of what these testing technologies are capable of. So I encourage you to learn more about this, and I'll put out more videos on the subject in the upcoming videos I'll post. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching my video. If you found it helpful, consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. If you have any constructive feedback to leave me, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. That's it for today, and I'll see you in the next video.